Search 7 open 3.5.01. As the medieval night falls, it is in these silent hours that some claim to feel the presence of saints and angels, walking among us in the stillness, bringing the divine closer to the earth. But in the darker corners of the world, whispers fill the air. Ghosts, demons, witches, and ancient rituals come alive in these shadowed moments. For most, however, these are the hours reserved for deep, untroubled sleep, when the body finds rest and the mind drifts into the kind of unconscious calm needed to repair the weariness of the day. It is during this time that life slows down, even for those living in the grand castles and humble cottages of the medieval world. Across villages, in bustling inns and towering monasteries, the common folk and royalty alike surrender to slumber, their fates intertwined in a larger tapestry that stretches beyond the reach of the present moment. The commoners sleep side by side with their lords and ladies, equal in their shared vulnerability to the night. Their dreams, though vastly different, are woven into the same threads of history that bind all lives together, regardless of social standing or wealth. The medieval world may be long gone, but in these quiet hours it feels as if we are still part of that world, a dream that lingers in our subconscious, inviting us to imagine the lives of those who came before. The thundering horses of knights and the silent prayers of cloistered monks all merge into the quiet hum of nightfall. Yet, as we lie between wakefulness and sleep, we too are part of that same flow of time. Whether peasant or noble, servant or ruler, in the realm of sleep, all are equal. And though their world seems far removed from ours, in the silence of the night, we find ourselves drawn closer to their existence, an existence marked by rituals, uncertainties, and a unique blend of hardship and grace. The world may have moved on, but for a moment, we are transported back to a time when the boundaries of reality and legend were blurred. So let us linger in this space for a little while, caught between past and present, between sleep and waking, as the echoes of history wrap around us like a comforting blanket. In this quiet stillness, where time seems to stretch and bend, we are reminded that we are all part of a much larger story. A story where the kings and queens, the monks and peasants, the warriors and poets, all once walked the earth with their own hopes, fears and dreams. The medieval world may have passed, but in the quiet of the night, it lives on within us. VIII 3.5.03. The challenges faced by medieval monarchs were not confined solely to the public eye. Behind the walls of their castles, amid the grandeur of the court, there were constant battles waged within. It is easy to imagine royalty living lives of luxury and ease, but the reality was often starkly different. While their lives were filled with lavish feasts, magnificent banquets, and the finest attire, these moments of opulence were often fleeting distractions from the immense weight of their duties. Beneath the rich velvet and gold, behind the curtains of fine silk, the royals were constantly aware of their vulnerability. They lived with the knowledge that their power was always at risk, that their position was fragile, and that their legacy was uncertain. Even in their private moments, they could not escape the demands of their role. Every move they made, every word they spoke, was laden with significance. Every action had the potential to shape the future of their kingdom. For them, the stakes of personal choices were high, too high to simply indulge in personal pleasures or seek refuge from their responsibilities. The very nature of their existence as monarchs meant that they were constantly performing, even in private. Their lives were not their own. They were the embodiment of their kingdoms, the physical manifestation of royal power and authority. To step away from this role, even for a moment, was to risk weakening their reign. Yet, despite the immense pressures, there were those who managed to find ways to break free from the confines of their royal duties, if only temporarily. Some sought solace in personal relationships, drawing close to trusted friends, confidants, or even lovers, using these connections to escape the rigid formality of court life. Others sought moments of solitude, retreating to their private chambers, gardens, or chapels, seeking a brief respite from the incessant demands of the crown. But even in these moments, they were never truly alone. The world they ruled over was always present, lurking just beyond the palace walls, and the consequences of their decisions always loomed. And for all the power and wealth that these kings and queens commanded, they too were at the mercy of fate. They could not control everything. They could not command the weather, control the tides of war, or guarantee the success of their reigns. Even the most formidable monarchs faced the unpredictable forces of nature, plague, famine, and storms that ravaged the land, and the inevitable uncertainty that accompanied these challenges. Monarchs were often forced to make decisions with little certainty of the outcome, knowing that any misstep could bring ruin to the kingdom they were entrusted to protect. At the same time, they were also deeply invested in maintaining their image. Perceptions of strength and stability were paramount. The slightest hint of weakness, doubt, or indecision could send their kingdom into turmoil. The pressure to remain unyielding, even in the face of overwhelming odds, was immense. They were not allowed the luxury of vulnerability or doubt, for to show such weakness was to risk being seen as unfit to rule. The royal family, after all, was supposed to represent not only the nation's power, but its unity and future. This immense pressure could drive even the most well-intentioned monarchs to make ruthless decisions, to bend their morals and ethics in order to maintain the semblance of control. But this fear, this need to maintain power at all costs, was also a double-edged sword. It often led to paranoia, mistrust, and a breakdown in the very alliances that monarchs sought to preserve. Loyalty, once thought unshakable, could quickly turn into treachery, as those closest to the crown jostled for power, eager to take the throne themselves or align with new, stronger forces. Monarchs had to navigate a complex and dangerous political landscape, constantly keeping their eyes open for enemies both within and outside their court. And in a world where life was fragile, betrayal could often be more dangerous than an external invasion. What many medieval monarchs discovered, though, was that for all their efforts to maintain control, they were ultimately at the mercy of the forces around them. The kingdoms they ruled were not machines they could simply govern at will. They were living, breathing entities, affected by the actions of their leaders, but also shaped by the desires, fears, and actions of their people. The fate of a kingdom could change with the winds of war, a shift in public opinion, or the sudden rise of an unexpected rival. This reality, this fragility, defined the lives of many royals, and yet, despite the ever-present spectre of uncertainty, the allure of power remained. The crown was still a symbol of greatness, of control, of legacy. It was the dream that drove many to fight for their place on the throne, even at the cost of their own humanity. But in this pursuit, they were often trapped by the very thing they sought, the need to remain powerful, to stay at the top, to leave a legacy that would outlive them. This need for control, for a lasting legacy, often came at the expense of personal peace and happiness. As we consider the lives of these kings and queens, we are reminded that the pursuit of power, while undeniably a part of human nature, also comes with its burdens. It is not enough to simply wear a crown. One must bear the weight of the crown's demands, even as the world around you shifts and your own desires are pushed to the background. Power is a force that can be both empowering and enslaving, a paradox that medieval royalty lived with daily. For one, as the sun rises higher, casting its golden glow over the lands, the days of kings and queens unfold like an intricate tapestry. Each moment is a carefully orchestrated performance, where every action, every word, carries meaning far beyond its immediate context. For medieval monarchs, the pressure to maintain the dignity of their office and secure their dynasty's future was relentless. Their days were marked by endless ceremonies, audiences with foreign dignitaries, meetings with advisors, the signing of decrees, the planning of wars, the overseeing of courtly rituals. Every move they made, no matter how small, was scrutinized, analyzed, and often recorded for posterity. At the heart of these regal duties was the constant balancing act between personal desire and public responsibility. For many kings and queens, the sacrifices were immense. While their subjects fought to survive the daily struggles of life, their rulers fought battles of a different kind. Battles for power, influence, and, perhaps most painfully, for their own survival within the complex and treacherous web of medieval politics. A misstep could bring ruin not only to the monarch, but to their entire family and the kingdom itself. Yet, for all the grandeur of royal life, there were moments, brief and fleeting, when the true nature of royalty was revealed. These moments, when the mask of power slipped, were rarely seen by the public, but they existed. Beneath the carefully crafted image of the regal monarch was often a human being struggling with doubt, fear, and loneliness. Kings, who seemed invincible to the common people, were sometimes overwhelmed by the weight of their duties. Queens, adorned in magnificent gowns and jewelry, felt the constant strain of their roles as wives, mothers, and symbols of their nations. This inner turmoil often went unnoticed, hidden behind the grandeur of royal courts and the constant performances expected of them. But it was always there, simmering just beneath the surface. Kings and queens were expected to be strong, unwavering, and perfect at all times, but in private moments, away from the watchful eyes of the court, many found themselves yearning for release, for respite, for the simple joy of being themselves, free from the expectations that bound them. It is in these moments of vulnerability that we begin to see the true cost of power. While the crown may offer wealth, status, and influence, it also demands sacrifices that no amount of gold or prestige can mitigate. The loss of personal freedom is perhaps the greatest price a monarch must pay. They may sit on a throne, but they are never truly free. Every action, every decision is made not for their own happiness, but for the good of the kingdom, for the survival of the dynasty, for the sake of their legacy. Their own desires are often suppressed in favor of what is best for their people, or what will maintain the fragile balance of power within their courts. For some monarchs, this loss of personal freedom became too much to bear. The pressure, the isolation, the constant sense of being watched, it was all too much. Some retreated into themselves, finding solace in solitude or in religious devotion. Others turned to cruelty, using their power to dominate those around them as a way of asserting some control over their own lives. And still others sought comfort in the arts, in literature, in the expression of emotion and beauty, hoping that through these outlets they could find some sense of release from the suffocating demands of their position. But despite these brief moments of respite, the reality of royal life remained unchanged. The crown may have brought prestige, but it also brought with it an unyielding weight, one that could break even the most powerful monarchs. The expectations, the duties, the pressure to be perfect were ever present. and the consequences of failing to live up to those expectations were dire. It was a life defined not by the joy of ruling, but by the constant battle to maintain power, to avoid falling from grace, to secure the future of the kingdom. For many kings and queens, the realization of this truth came too late. They were trapped in a cycle of power, a cycle that offered little room for personal expression or freedom. Their lives were not their own. They belonged to the crown, to the kingdom, to the people they ruled, and in the end, when their reigns came to an end, whether through death, rebellion, or political shift, they were often remembered not for who they were, but for what they did. Their names, their legacies were tied to the kingdom they left behind, not to the person they had been. Yet, even in their fall from power, there was a sense of humanity that transcended the crown. For despite all the pressure, all the expectations, all the sacrifices, the kings and queens of medieval Europe were, in the end, still human. They sought love, peace, and meaning, just as we all do. They were not invincible, nor were they above the basic human emotions that bind us all together. And in their struggles, we see the true cost of power. A life lived for others, often at the expense of the self. 0703 Pump Pen or Fame. The deeper we explore the lives of medieval monarchs, the more we uncover the complexities and contradictions that define their reigns. While they ruled vast territories, wielded immense power, and controlled the fates of entire nations, they were, at the core, just individuals grappling with the very human struggles of identity, fear, and loneliness. Their lives were often filled with grand ceremonies and political maneuvering, but these external displays masked the internal battles they fought every day. For many monarchs, the question of who they were outside of their royal duties was never fully answered. Their identities were shaped by the roles they played, not just as kings or queens, but as symbols of their nations. Their every move was public, their lives laid bare for all to see. They were not just rulers, they were icons, larger than life, embodying the strength, wisdom, and justice of their kingdoms. And yet, beneath that surface, they were human beings with personal desires, doubts, and vulnerabilities. Perhaps the greatest contradiction faced by these monarchs was the constant conflict between their public and private selves. To be a monarch was to exist in a world where personal freedom was a luxury they could never truly afford. Every decision was made with an eye on the throne, every move calculated for the preservation of the monarchy. The weight of their responsibility was so great that it often overshadowed their own needs, wants, and dreams. They lived not for themselves, but for their people, their families, and their kingdoms. And yet, despite all of this, they were still human. They still longed for connection, for understanding, for love, just like anyone else. For many queens, this struggle was even more pronounced. They were expected to be perfect, graceful, elegant, and dutiful wives and mothers, while also navigating the complex world of politics, religion, and power. Their lives were often defined by the need to produce heirs, secure alliances, and support their husband's rule. Their personal desires, their ambitions, their needs for recognition or autonomy were frequently suppressed in favor of their public roles. And yet, despite these restrictions, many queens managed to exert influence in ways that would leave a lasting impact on their time. Eleanor of Aquitaine serves as a prime example of a queen who defied the limitations placed upon her. Though her marriages were politically motivated and fraught with conflict, Eleanor used her position to shape the cultural and political landscape of Europe. She was a patron of the arts, a leader in the Crusades, and a mother of kings, her legacy enduring far beyond her own reign. Eleanor's story is a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of finding agency within a system that often sought to restrict it. Even within the confines of her role, she found ways to assert her will, to influence the course of history, and to leave a legacy that continues to be remembered today. But for many other queens, the reality was far less empowering. Their lives were often reduced to their ability to bear children and maintain dynastic power. Their worth was measured by their ability to produce heirs, especially male heirs, who would continue the royal bloodline. Their personal desires, ambitions, and dreams were secondary to the needs of the state. These queens were expected to be nothing more than symbols of royal continuity, their personal lives sacrificed for the good of the kingdom. This reduction of royal women to mere instruments of dynastic survival was a constant theme throughout medieval history. Yet, despite the immense challenges they faced, many queens still managed to find ways to leave their mark on history. Some did so through political influence, others through cultural patronage, and still others through their roles as mothers and wives. Despite the rigid societal structures that sought to keep them in check, these women found ways to assert themselves, to shape the course of events, and to make their voices heard, even if only in the quietest corners of their kingdoms. The lives of kings were similarly fraught with contradiction. While they were expected to be all-powerful rulers, their lives were often marked by vulnerability and fear. The pressure to maintain control, to defend their kingdoms, to ensure their legacy was secure, weighed heavily on them. Many kings were haunted by the fear of rebellion, betrayal, or the failure of their dynasties. They lived with the constant awareness that their reigns could be cut short by the actions of their enemies, both foreign and domestic. The burden of their crowns was immense, and it often led to decisions made out of fear rather than reason or desire. Despite this, the kings who succeeded were often those who could find the balance between strength and vulnerability. They were able to navigate the complex world of medieval politics, striking alliances, managing rebellions, and keeping their kingdoms stable. But this balance was fragile, and even the most successful kings were often brought down by the forces they couldn't control. Whether it was a scheming advisor, a betrayed alliance, or a popular revolt, their fates were intertwined with the fortunes of their kingdoms, and the slightest shift in the political or social landscape could lead to their downfall. No 703.6. As we venture further into the lives of medieval monarchs, it becomes clear that their power, while vast, was never absolute. The crown, though a symbol of supreme authority, was always fragile, subject to forces both internal and external. These rulers were often at the mercy of the political and social climates they inhabited, and their ability to maintain power was dependent on their skill in navigating these turbulent waters. A monarch who failed to keep the balance between personal ambition and political reality was likely to see their reign come to an abrupt and often violent end. For all their wealth and influence, many kings and queens were, at their core, incredibly vulnerable. They lived in a world where betrayal, intrigue, and political maneuvering were everyday occurrences. Every ally could quickly become an enemy, and every trusted advisor could be a potential traitor. In a world where loyalty was both a prized commodity and a rare currency, monarchs found themselves constantly surrounded by a web of suspicion and deceit. The very people who helped them rise to power could just as easily be the ones to bring them down. Take, for example, the story of King Richard II of England. As a young ruler, Richard inherited a kingdom plagued by internal strife and external threats. Though he initially showed great promise, his reign was marked by increasing instability and a growing sense of alienation from his nobles. His dependence on a close-knit group of advisors known as his inner circle led to resentment and betrayal from the very people he trusted most. Ultimately, Richard's failure to balance the competing demands of loyalty, power, and governance led to his downfall. In 1399, he was deposed by his cousin, Henry Bolingbroke, who would become King Henry IV. Richard was imprisoned and ultimately died under mysterious circumstances, a tragic end for a king who had once been destined to rule for a lifetime. Richard's story serves as a cautionary tale for all rulers of his time. The fragility of power, the fleeting nature of loyalty, and the treacherous waters of court politics were not unique to him. Every king and queen faced these same challenges, and many met with the same fate. Even the most powerful monarchs were never truly in control of their own destinies. The forces that shaped their lives were too vast, too unpredictable to be tamed by any one ruler. For queens, the challenges were often even greater. They were expected to bear children, maintain alliances, and secure the future of their families. But they were also expected to remain subordinate to their husbands, to be the perfect wives, mothers, and symbols of royal virtue. The burden of these expectations was immense, and for many queens it led to a life of quiet suffering and personal sacrifice. Their desires, their ambitions, their dreams were often set aside for the sake of their dynasties. And yet, despite these constraints, some queens were able to exert a degree of influence over their kingdoms, carving out spaces for themselves within the rigid structures of medieval politics. One such queen was Isabella of Castile, who, alongside her husband Ferdinand of Aragon, played a pivotal role in the unification of Spain. Though Isabella was expected to simply support her husband's rule, she proved herself to be a formidable leader in her own right. She was a shrewd political operator, balancing the demands of the church, the nobility, and her own court. Isabella's reign marked the beginning of Spain's rise as a dominant European power, and her legacy has endured for centuries. Her ability to navigate the treacherous political landscape of the time, and her skill in balancing personal ambition with the needs of her kingdom, made her one of the most influential queens in history. Isabella's story is a rare example of a queen who not only survived in a male-dominated world, but thrived. Her success was not just the result of her royal bloodline, but of her intelligence, political savvy, and determination. She was a queen who, despite the limitations of her role, was able to shape the course of history. Her legacy is a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of agency, even in the most restrictive circumstances. So we were Queen 547. As we continue to explore the lives of these monarchs, it becomes increasingly apparent that the weight of the crown was not merely a symbol of authority, but also a profound personal sacrifice. The lives of kings and queens were defined by a relentless cycle of public duty, political maneuvering, and personal struggle. While their actions affected entire nations, their personal desires, fears, and vulnerabilities often took a back seat to the demands of the throne. For kings, the burden of leadership often overshadowed everything else in their lives. They were expected to be warriors, diplomats, statesmen, and symbols of power. Yet, underneath the armor and regalia, many kings were deeply insecure about their ability to lead. The constant pressure to maintain control over their kingdoms, to keep their nobles in check, and to defend their realms from outside threats, created an atmosphere of constant stress. Even the most powerful monarchs were aware that their reigns could be toppled in an instant by internal unrest, rebellion, or the shifting tides of foreign relations. This uncertainty was ever present, lurking in the shadows of the royal court. Even as kings basked in the glory of victory or the admiration of their subjects, they were haunted by the knowledge that their power was fragile and that their kingdoms were only as strong as the people who supported them. The fear of losing control, of being overthrown or betrayed, was a constant companion for many medieval monarchs, and yet they could not afford to show weakness. They were forced to project strength at all times, even when their hearts were filled with doubt and fear. The lives of queens were equally fraught with tension. While they may not have carried the same political weight as their husbands, their roles were often just as complex and challenging. Queens were expected to produce heirs, to maintain the stability of their families, and to serve as the moral and cultural pillars of their courts. Yet, despite their significant influence, queens were often sidelined in matters of state, their power constrained by the patriarchal systems that governed medieval society. But just as kings found ways to navigate the intricacies of their roles, so too did many queens carve out spaces for themselves. Their power often came not from military conquest or political alliances, but from their ability to shape the culture and values of their kingdoms. Many queens became patrons of the arts, commissioning works of literature, music, and visual art that would become integral to the cultural identity of their nations. They used their influence to support intellectual pursuits, to fund religious institutions, and to advocate for causes that mattered to them. In doing so, these queens were able to leave a lasting mark on the world, despite the limitations of their formal power. One queen who exemplified this was Catherine de' Medici of France. Though she was often overshadowed by the more famous figures in French history, Catherine played a central role in shaping the political and cultural landscape of her time. As the wife of King Henry II and the mother of 3 French kings, she navigated the dangerous waters of court politics with skill and determination. She was a patron of the arts, a supporter of the French Renaissance, and a queen who wielded her influence over the course of French history. Her legacy, though often overlooked, speaks to the power that women could wield, even within a system that sought to limit their agency. Despite her achievements, however, Catherine's reign was also marked by tragedy. The French Wars of Religion, which tore apart the country during her time as regent, left deep scars in the French psyche. Catherine, though a skilled politician, was unable to prevent the violence and division that plagued her kingdom. Her personal losses, the deaths of her children, the betrayals of her closest allies, took their toll. Yet, even in the face of these challenges, she continued to play a central role in French politics, navigating the complexities of the court with grace and determination. In many ways, Catherine's story is symbolic of the experiences of many royal women, deeply involved in the political affairs of their time, yet constrained by their gender, their roles, and their societal expectations. Despite the limitations placed upon them, many queens like Catherine were able to wield tremendous power, shaping the course of history in subtle yet profound ways. As we delve deeper into the complexities of royal life, it becomes evident that, despite the wealth, luxury, and power that kings and queens held, their lives were shaped by paradoxes, forces of both control and surrender. They were, in many ways, the most powerful figures in society, yet they were also the most constrained. Their lives were defined not by freedom, but by the unyielding demands of the crown and the weight of expectation. The very thing that elevated them to greatness, their role as monarchs, was also the source of their deepest struggles. For kings, this paradox was especially pronounced. They were expected to be the embodiment of strength, wisdom, and justice, yet they were never truly free. The constant pressure to rule with authority, to maintain power, and to protect the kingdom from external threats left little room for personal desires or emotional expression. They were often trapped by their own roles, forced to suppress their fears, doubts, and vulnerabilities for the sake of their reigns. Even in their private moments, kings were bound by the expectations of their court and the public. They had to remain steadfast, unwavering, even in the face of adversity. This led to a profound sense of isolation. While the court was filled with advisors, courtiers, and nobles, the king often stood alone, burdened by the weight of responsibility. It was not uncommon for monarchs to feel detached from those around them, as they were always aware that their position was precarious, their power fragile. The very people they ruled over could just as easily turn against them, and the alliances they formed could easily be shattered. This isolation was not limited to kings alone. Queens, too, were often trapped in a similar web of duty and expectation. While they wielded considerable influence behind the scenes, their public roles were often constrained by societal norms. The queen's primary responsibility was to secure the dynasty, by producing heirs and managing the royal household. These roles were essential to the continuity of the monarchy, yet they left little room for personal ambition or freedom. For queens, the pressure to produce heirs, especially male heirs, was immense. Their worth was often judged by their ability to secure the future of the dynasty, to carry on the royal bloodline. This burden was a constant source of anxiety for many queens, who faced immense scrutiny from their husbands, their courts, and the public. Their personal lives were rarely their own. They were often married off for political reasons, their happiness secondary to the needs of the kingdom. And yet, despite these limitations, many queens found ways to exert their influence over their kingdoms, shaping the cultural, religious, and political landscapes of their time. One queen who faced these pressures was Elizabeth I of England, whose reign is often seen as one of the most successful in British history. Elizabeth was never married, a fact that was both a source of personal freedom and political challenge. As the Virgin Queen, she defied the traditional expectations of royal women by refusing to marry for the sake of political alliances. Instead, she maintained a delicate balance between power and independence, navigating the treacherous waters of court politics and international diplomacy with remarkable skill. Her reign was marked by cultural flourishing and military success, yet it was also a time of intense political strife. The question of her succession remained unresolved throughout her life, as the fear of losing the throne loomed over her reign. Elizabeth's story is a striking example of a monarch who navigated the delicate balance between personal desire and public duty. She was able to maintain her power and influence without sacrificing her independence, but her reign was also marked by the deep isolation that often accompanied her position. Though she ruled with great success, Elizabeth was, like all monarchs, bound by the expectations of her time. She was never truly free, always weighed down by the responsibilities of the throne and the constant fear that her reign could be undone by forces beyond her control. Therefore, une free femme sur un homme. The complexities of royal life extended far beyond the public and ceremonial spheres. While the life of a king or queen may appear, at first glance, to be one of unmatched privilege, the reality was often marked by a constant tension between the personal and the political, the individual and the institution. These monarchs, though elevated above all others in their kingdoms, were constantly navigating the delicate balance between fulfilling their duties and maintaining their own sense of self. In the grand halls of their castles, surrounded by advisors, courtiers, and noblemen, kings and queens were often more alone than they would have liked. Their roles demanded an ever-present performance, an unwavering facade of strength, wisdom, and resolve. The royal court was a world of intricate political maneuvering, where alliances were formed and broken with a mere glance or word. In this environment, even the slightest misstep could have disastrous consequences. The pressure to maintain control over both the kingdom and the individuals within it was overwhelming. For every decision made in the royal court, there were consequences that rippled through the kingdom. Every action, from the smallest gesture to the largest decree, had the potential to shape the future of the monarchy. Despite this immense responsibility, the personal lives of monarchs were often a matter of public concern. The pressure to marry, to produce heirs, and to secure alliances through family ties was ever present. A monarch's personal desires, their feelings, and their ambitions were frequently pushed aside in favor of the political stability of the kingdom. Their marriages, while often seen as a means of consolidating power, were rarely based on love or personal choice. For queens especially, marriage was a strategic affair, one that was necessary to ensure the survival of the royal family and the continuity of the bloodline. For kings, the expectation of producing heirs was equally pressing. Their role as fathers was central to their legacy, yet they were often trapped in the cycle of duty and obligation. The fear of producing no male heirs or of failing to secure the royal lineage was a constant source of anxiety. This was a fear shared by both kings and queens, who were keenly aware of how their personal lives could affect the future of their realms. The emotional toll of these pressures was immense, but few could afford to show any sign of weakness. But amidst the endless political maneuvering, many kings and queens managed to find a way to assert themselves, even within the constraints of their royal roles. Their influence was not always overt, it was often quiet and subtle, expressed through their patronage of the arts, their support of religious institutions, and their involvement in diplomatic negotiations. In some cases, their power was exercised through acts of kindness or intelligence, shaping the cultural and social landscapes of their time. Take, for example, the reign of Catherine the Great of Russia, a queen who defied the traditional limitations placed upon her as a female ruler. Initially brought to Russia through marriage, Catherine's rise to power was anything but conventional. She took control of the throne after the deposition of her husband, Peter III, and went on to become one of the most successful and revered monarchs in Russian history. Catherine's reign was marked by a strong focus on expanding Russia's borders, modernizing its economy, and promoting the arts and culture. She ruled with intelligence, political savvy, and a keen understanding of the balance between personal desire and royal duty. Yet, Catherine's success was also the result of the personal sacrifices she made. Her reign was fraught with political challenges, from the loyalty of her nobles to the expectations of her court. Like many monarchs before her, Catherine had to navigate the delicate balance between maintaining her power and preserving her humanity. Her legacy, however, is a reminder that even in the most restrictive of circumstances, queens could wield immense power, and their influence could extend far beyond the limitations of their gender. As the lives of these medieval monarchs continue to unfold, we see a recurring theme, the immense loneliness that came with absolute power. Despite being surrounded by advisors, courtiers, and subjects, kings and queens were often isolated in ways that many of us could never imagine. Their royal positions demanded constant vigilance, not just over their kingdom, but over themselves. Every word, every gesture, every decision they made was scrutinized by those around them. The burden of their power was such that it often created a divide between the monarch and the very people they were meant to lead. For many monarchs, this isolation was particularly acute when it came to their personal lives. The demands of the throne, the necessity of producing heirs, and the intricacies of political alliances left little room for genuine relationships. Their marriages were often not the result of love, but of necessity, strategic moves designed to strengthen the monarchy and secure the royal lineage. In a time when the survival of the kingdom depended on bloodlines, the idea of romantic love was often secondary to the demands of duty. And yet, there were those who managed to carve out personal spaces within their roles. Some found solace in the arts, supporting music, literature, and philosophy, and thus shaping the cultural landscape of their time. Others found their expression through diplomacy, navigating the complexities of foreign alliances and negotiations with finesse. Yet these small pockets of freedom were rare and often fleeting, overshadowed by the immense responsibility that came with wearing the crown. One monarch who experienced this tension was King Henry VIII of England. Though often remembered for his 6 marriages and the dramatic religious reforms he instituted, Henry's reign was also defined by his internal struggle for power and legacy. His personal desires often clashed with the needs of the kingdom, particularly in his pursuit of a male heir. This obsession with succession led him to make decisions that would reshape the entire religious landscape of England. The Church of England was born out of his desire for control, both over his own life and over the monarchy. But this was not without cost. Henry's personal turmoil, his marriages, and his break from Rome left lasting scars on both his kingdom and his legacy. Despite the monumental changes Henry brought about, his reign was also marked by personal loneliness and dissatisfaction. His later years were filled with ill health, regret, and a deepening isolation from those around him. The very thing he had sought, absolute control over his kingdom and his destiny, had, in the end, become a prison. Henry's story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of obsession with power and control, and the loneliness that often accompanies those who seek to wield it. And yet, even in their isolation, these kings and queens continue to lead, to rule, and to influence the course of history. Their reigns were marked by contradictions. They were both rulers and prisoners, powerful and vulnerable, adored and feared. Their personal lives, though often hidden from public view, were shaped by the same desires for love, connection, and legacy that define us all. The difference was that their lives, under the scrutiny of the throne, had little room for personal indulgence. This paradox of immense power coupled with personal sacrifice defines the legacy of many medieval monarchs. Their stories remind us that the pursuit of power is not simply about controlling others, but also about the toll it takes on those who seek it. It is a reminder that even those who sit on thrones, surrounded by wealth and influence, are still bound by the same forces of human nature that we all experience: desire, fear, love, and the need for connection. Sir and Snow William. As we draw closer to the final chapters of these monarchs' stories, it becomes clear that the lives of kings and queens were often defined by the tension between the immense power they wielded and the profound isolation they experienced. Their authority was absolute, yet they were continually vulnerable, exposed to the whims of fate, to the intrigues of the court, and to the shifting tides of politics. In many ways, the monarchy itself was a paradox, a system built on both strength and fragility. Despite their seemingly unshakable positions, monarchs were often in a constant state of vulnerability. They were perpetually surrounded by courtiers, ministers, and advisors, all of whom had their own agendas, their own ambitions, and their own desires for influence. Trust was scarce, and even those who had been closest to the monarch could turn against them in an instant. In a world where loyalty was as easily bought as it was betrayed, these kings and queens were never truly secure. They lived in a state of constant uncertainty, aware that the very power that elevated them could also destroy them. Perhaps the greatest challenge faced by monarchs was the pressure to preserve their dynasties. Their personal desires, their hopes for happiness and peace, were often secondary to the need to secure the future of their kingdoms. For many, this meant making difficult decisions that were often painful and filled with personal sacrifice. The search for a male heir was one such decision that haunted many kings and queens, leading them to make decisions that were politically advantageous but emotionally fraught. The desire to ensure the survival of the royal bloodline often overshadowed everything else, even love and personal happiness. Take, for example, the reign of Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom, whose personal life was largely shaped by the need to secure the British monarchy. Victoria's marriage to Prince Albert was based on love and mutual respect, but her role as queen often demanded that she put her family's well-being above her own personal desires. As a mother of 9 children, Victoria was deeply invested in ensuring the continuation of the royal line, often pushing her children into marriages that would secure political alliances for the British Empire. Despite her deep love for Albert, it was her children who became her greatest concern. and much of her reign was focused on maintaining the stability of the monarchy. Victoria's life, though marked by love and devotion, was also filled with personal struggles. The death of Prince Albert, her beloved husband, left her devastated, and for years she withdrew from public life, mourning the loss of the man who had been her partner and confidant. Her reign, which spanned over 6 decades, was marked by personal sacrifice, and her private grief was a reminder of the deep emotional toll that the demands of monarchy could take on an individual. Even as she ruled with strength and grace, Queen Victoria was, at her core, a woman who had to navigate the complex and often painful balance between her duties as queen and her desires as a person. Yet, despite the emotional turmoil she faced, Victoria's reign is remembered as one of the most successful in British history. Her legacy is one of strength, resilience, and devotion to both her family and her kingdom. She succeeded in securing the future of the British monarchy, ensuring that her descendants would inherit a stable and prosperous empire. Her story, though one of personal loss, is also one of triumph, a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the power of duty. Victoria's life, like those of many other monarchs, illustrates the delicate balance between personal sacrifice and public duty. Monarchs were constantly torn between their roles as rulers and their desire for personal fulfillment, and in the end, their stories remind us that even the most powerful figures in history were shaped by the same emotions, struggles, and contradictions that we all experience. Their lives were not just defined by their crowns or their thrones, but by their humanity, the same humanity that allowed them to rule with compassion, to make tough decisions, and to leave a legacy that endures. 0703 FAM 12. As we approach the final reflections on the lives of medieval monarchs, it is crucial to recognize the lasting impact their stories have had, not just on history, but on the way we perceive power, legacy, and the human condition. While the world of kings and queens may feel distant to us today, the struggles they faced, the choices they made, and the personal cost they endured are timeless. These monarchs were not simply figures of authority. They were people whose lives were shaped by the same forces that shape ours: love, fear, ambition, and the quest for meaning. The paradox of royal life, however, was its constant tension between immense power and personal vulnerability. On the one hand, monarchs were expected to embody strength, wisdom, and unwavering authority. They were the very symbols of their kingdoms, their faces gracing coins, portraits, and banners, representing not only the power of the throne, but the unity of the nation. Yet, for all their authority, they were also prisoners of their position. The very responsibilities that made them kings and queens also made them slaves to the throne. Monarchs were often isolated, both by their status and by the roles they were forced to play. They could not afford the luxuries of personal freedom to make choices based purely on their desires or feelings. Every action, every relationship, every word spoken in public or private was weighed against the demands of their position. Their lives were filled with political intrigue, military strategy, and the constant battle to secure their legacy. Every day brought a new challenge, a new demand for their attention, and the weight of the crown was never far from their minds. But within this system of power and performance, some monarchs were able to find ways to assert themselves. While their public roles were often defined by duty and protocol, they still managed to carve out personal spaces in which they could express their individuality. Some turned to the arts, others to religion, and still others to diplomacy. In these moments, when the constraints of royal life seemed less burdensome, they found ways to reclaim their humanity and assert their influence. Whether through patronage of artists, sponsorship of intellectual movements, or even participation in military campaigns, these monarchs found outlets for their personal agency. Take, for example, the reign of King Louis XIV of France, often remembered as the Sun King, for his extravagant style and absolute control over the French monarchy. His reign was marked by remarkable achievements in the arts, the expansion of French territory, and the consolidation of royal power. Yet beneath the gilded palace of Versailles and the grand celebrations, Louis XIV was deeply aware of the isolation his power demanded. He ruled with an iron fist, but his reign was also characterized by an intense personal loneliness. The court at Versailles, while filled with courtiers and nobles, was also a place of competition and suspicion. Louis could never truly trust those around him, and even the most loyal subjects were potential threats to his authority. Despite the grand image he projected, Louis XIV struggled with the same fears and insecurities that many monarchs faced. He feared losing his grip on power, feared being betrayed by those closest to him, and feared that his legacy would be tarnished. His obsession with controlling the image of the monarchy led to his creation of one of the most elaborate royal courts in history, but it also left him isolated, constantly performing for an audience that would never truly know him. And yet, despite these challenges, Louis XIV's legacy is one of remarkable achievement. His rule brought stability to France after years of civil unrest, and his reign marked the height of French influence in Europe. But his personal story, like that of so many monarchs, is one of paradox. For all his power, Louis was also a man defined by the very limitations of his role. His life was one of constant performance, and even his most intimate moments were marked by the expectations of the crown. Louis XIV's story is a powerful reminder that the pursuit of power is often fraught with personal sacrifice. Even those at the height of their influence are not immune to the loneliness, isolation, and vulnerability that come with their positions. His life was defined by his reign, and yet it was also defined by his struggle to preserve his humanity within the confines of royal duty. As we near the end of our exploration into the lives of medieval monarchs, it becomes clear that their legacy is not solely defined by the power they held or the territories they conquered. Their stories, filled with both triumphs and tragedies, remind us that even those who sit at the highest peaks of power are still bound by the same universal struggles that define the human experience. Kings and queens may have been rulers of vast realms, but they were also people, navigating their lives within a system that demanded constant sacrifice and unrelenting duty. For many monarchs, the burden of leadership was compounded by the emotional toll of their roles. While their courts were filled with advisors, courtiers, and nobility, they often found themselves profoundly alone. The weight of their crown made it difficult to trust anyone fully, and their positions created an invisible barrier between them and the people they ruled. Despite being surrounded by others, they were isolated by the very nature of their power. This isolation was not only emotional, but also psychological. The constant demands of the throne, the pressure to make decisions that would shape the future of their kingdoms, and the fear of being undermined or betrayed made it impossible for these rulers to find true solace in anyone or anything. The lives of kings and queens, while defined by their royal duties, were also marked by the intense personal struggles they faced in their pursuit of stability and legacy. They lived in a world where personal desires often took a back seat to the needs of the monarchy. Even their marriages, which in many cases were seen as tools for political alliances rather than unions of love, were shaped by the kingdom's interests. For monarchs, their families, their futures, and their very identities were intertwined with the fate of the crown. Their personal happiness often had to be sacrificed for the stability of the realm. Take the example of Queen Elizabeth II, whose reign is often considered one of the most successful in British history. Elizabeth was never married, and her decision to remain single, while it allowed her to maintain political autonomy, also subjected her to intense public scrutiny. Her inability to marry for love, to form deep personal connections outside the realm of duty, was a source of tension throughout her reign. But it was precisely this decision, her ability to maintain control over her own life and her kingdom, that defined her legacy. Her reign was one of political and cultural flourishing, but it was also one of profound personal sacrifice. Elizabeth's story is one of triumph in the face of loneliness and the struggle for autonomy. Despite the significant achievements of monarchs like Elizabeth, the cost of their success was high. Their legacy, for all its glory, often came at the expense of their personal lives. They were constantly torn between their duties as rulers and their desires as individuals. Their story is one of paradoxes. They were both figures of immense power and immense vulnerability, respected and feared, yet often profoundly alone. They lived lives that demanded the highest levels of sacrifice, not only from their subjects, but from themselves. In the end, their stories remind us that even the most powerful rulers were still human, flawed, vulnerable, and shaped by the same emotional struggles that bind us all. The pursuit of legacy, the quest for immortality through power, often left these monarchs with little room to experience the simple pleasures of life. Their names may have been etched into history, their actions remembered for centuries, but their personal stories, the moments of doubt, fear, and loneliness, are often lost to time. The crown may have brought them wealth and influence, but it also carried with it a heavy price: the sacrifice of personal freedom, the inability to live for themselves, and the constant crushing weight of expectation. As we reflect on the lives of these royals, it is clear that their stories are not just about power or political achievements. They're about the human experience, the sacrifices made in the name of duty, the struggle to maintain personal identity amidst overwhelming expectations, and the quest for meaning in a world that often demanded perfection. Their legacy is not simply one of victory and wealth, but of human complexity, of the inner battles fought in the shadows of the crown, and perhaps in the end, it is this complexity that makes their stories so compelling. These kings and queens were not just figures of legend, but real people, struggling, loving, sacrificing, and yearning for something beyond the crown. Their stories are a reminder that, no matter how far we rise, we all share in the same human struggles. The weight of the crown may have been theirs to bear, but their emotional journeys are universal, offering insight into the enduring nature of the human condition. As we reach the conclusion of this exploration into the lives of medieval monarchs, we are reminded that their stories are not just historical events, but timeless reflections on the nature of power, human vulnerability, and the pursuit of legacy. These kings and queens, for all their authority and influence, were not immune to the universal struggles that shape all lives. They were not simply rulers of lands, but also people trying to find meaning, connection, and a sense of purpose in a world filled with contradictions. The royal lives we've examined reveal a stark truth, that the pursuit of power, while it may elevate an individual to great heights, often comes with deep personal costs. The The crowns these monarchs wore were symbols of immense authority, but also of immense responsibility. They were not free to live for themselves. Their lives were constantly dictated by the needs of the kingdom, the expectations of the people, and the demands of the court. Even the smallest misstep could send shockwaves through the very fabric of their reign, and they were often forced to make decisions that favored the kingdom at the expense of their own happiness. In many ways, the crown was both a gift and a curse. The monarchs who wore it enjoyed unmatched privileges and power, but they also carried with them a profound isolation. Their role as rulers separated them from the people they governed, leaving them to live in a world of constant scrutiny and performance. They were expected to embody the ideals of strength, wisdom, and justice, but were also human beings, shaped by the same fears, doubts, and desires that define us all. They lived in a world where loyalty was as fragile as the alliances they formed, where betrayal was a constant threat, and where their legacy was uncertain, depending on the political winds of their time. But even in the face of these challenges, there were moments of profound humanity. Some monarchs found solace in the arts, others in religion, and still others in the quiet moments of personal reflection. For many, the most powerful legacy they could leave was not one of political conquest or military victory, but one of human connection. The relationships they formed, the alliances they built, and the cultural movements they supported all became part of their enduring influence. Take, for example, the remarkable legacy of Queen Victoria. Though her reign was marked by political upheaval and the expansion of the British Empire, Victoria's personal legacy was also one of profound emotional depth. Her life, defined by both public duty and private sorrow, was a testament to the complexity of monarchy. Victoria's relationship with her beloved husband, Prince Albert, shaped not only her personal life but also the cultural landscape of Victorian England. Her grief after Albert's death and the way she withdrew from public life for years illustrated the human side of a queen who had spent her life balancing the demands of the crown with the deep emotional ties that define us all. Victoria's story is a poignant reminder that even the most powerful monarchs are still human, still shaped by love, loss, and the search for meaning. Her reign, marked by significant political and social change, also revealed the deep, personal costs of being a queen, and in this, she was not alone. Many other monarchs, despite their strength and power, were driven by the same desires to leave a legacy, to be remembered, and to find a sense of peace within the roles they had inherited. Ultimately, the lives of medieval monarchs remind us that power, though it can elevate a person above the ordinary, also binds them in ways that are not immediately visible. The crown may grant authority, but it also demands sacrifice of privacy, of personal freedom, and, at times, of their very humanity. The true cost of royalty is not just in the material wealth it brings, but in the emotional toll it takes. Monarchs, for all their power, were bound by the same human struggles that we all face: loneliness, fear, longing, and the pursuit of connection. Their stories, in the end, are not just about crowns and kingdoms, but about the enduring human spirit. And perhaps this is the most lasting lesson of all, that the human experience, no matter how powerful or isolated we may become, is still rooted in the same desires and fears that have always defined us. Kings and queens may have ruled vast empires, but in the end they were just people, seeking love, connection, and meaning in a world that often seemed beyond their control. Their stories remind us that no matter how much power we wield, we are still human, and it is this shared humanity that unites us all across time and space. Doors to no free pine time society. As dawn begins to creep across the horizon, the medieval world stirs. In the sleepy villages and vast castles, the silence of the night gradually gives way to the sounds of a new day. Chirping birds, the low murmur of distant chatter, the clatter of carts on cobblestone streets. Yet, even with the rising sun, the lives of the medieval people are filled with uncertainty. For many, each day is a battle for survival, a struggle to meet the basic needs of food, shelter, and safety. But for others, the arrival of the morning brings the weight of responsibilities even greater than their own. It is not just the common folk who wake with burdens on their shoulders, but the monarchs, the lords, and ladies who carry the fate of entire kingdoms within their grasp. For these rulers, the morning brings with it a new set of duties. The world around them is shaped by intricate politics, complex alliances, and endless ceremonies. From the moment they rise from their bedchamber, they are swept into a whirlwind of meetings, discussions, and decisions that will affect the lives of millions. They must contend with both external threats, rival kingdoms, rebellious lords, marauding invaders, and internal pressures, from factions within their court to the ever-present tension between personal desires and royal duty. For them, there is little time for rest or relaxation. Their lives are consumed by the relentless demands of power, and even the smallest misstep can send ripples of consequence throughout their lands. But even for these powerful rulers, the days are not without their own moments of vulnerability. Beneath the cold exterior of kings and queens, there lies the same fear, doubt, and longing that resides in all humans. Kings fear the collapse of their reigns, the loss of their power, the betrayal of those closest to them. Queens too are haunted by their own set of anxieties, the pressure to produce heirs, the fear of being forgotten, the worry of not living up to the expectations placed upon them. Though they may sit upon thrones made of gold, they are still haunted by the same fears and insecurities as the peasants who toil in the fields. And while royalty is often associated with wealth and luxury, there are also moments of deep isolation. The palace, despite its grandeur, can feel cold and lonely. Kings and queens are separated from the world they govern, trapped in a world of protocol, power, and constant surveillance. The people they rule over may adore them or fear them, but they rarely know them in any meaningful way. The court is a place of constant performance, where even the smallest gesture is scrutinized. The king must always appear strong, unyielding, and wise, while the queen must remain composed and graceful, even in moments of personal sorrow or doubt. In the midst of this complexity, there are fleeting moments when the royals find brief respite. It may come in the form of a quiet walk in the garden, a few moments of prayer in the chapel, or a conversation with a trusted confidant. But these moments are rare, and they are often interrupted by the demands of the throne. Yet, even in these brief windows of peace, there remains a tension, an awareness that the momentary calm is fleeting, and that the weight of the crown will soon pull them back into the realm of responsibility. The lives of medieval monarchs, then, are defined by a constant push and pull between their roles as rulers and their desires as individuals. They are constantly aware that their lives are not their own, that they belong to the kingdom, to the people, and to the legacy they are meant to build. This tension between personal desire and public duty is at the heart of their existence. They are both the ultimate authority in their lands, and yet, in many ways, the most constrained of all. But, despite the immense power that kings and queens hold, they are also bound by the limitations of their time. They are at the mercy of the politics of their day, the decisions of their advisors, and the shifting tides of war and peace. They must navigate a world of fragile alliances and unstable power dynamics, always on the lookout for threats both external and internal. Even in their moments of solitude, they are never truly free. Their lives are constantly under scrutiny, their every action subject to the expectations of their court, their subjects, and the gods themselves.